Okay, everyone, I think we are ready to make a start. It's great to have so many of you with us today, whether it's your morning, whether it's your afternoon, late afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for Coffee and Insight. I hope you have your coffee or your tea or whatever it might be. And we're it's really great to see you all. So I hope. I have met most of you, but for those of you who I haven't, I am Zoe Sinclair and I am one of the founders of This Can Happen. And every quarter or so, we have a Coffee and Insights where I just invite some really interesting people who I think you are going to find interesting to have a very, very quick chat. It was no longer than half an hour. I sit here and I have a chat with people, and hopefully it inspires you and gives you some insight. So before I formally start with our guest today, and as usual, hope that the tech works, that I can bring everyone in to have a chat with me. A couple of things that I wanted to mention. First of all, many of you will have seen, or if not, will be seeing very shortly, that it is our Leadership Summit, formerly known as the Retreat, coming up in January, and we're really excited to have as many of you as possible. It is targeted specifically at you, at the leads in this mental well-being space. It's a 24-hour insight, data, analysis, strategy. 24 hours away at a great hotel in the UK, and really hope that many of you will be able to join us on the 21st and 22nd of January. Closer to home, many of you will be aware that it is our America's conference, our America's online conference, and our Asia conference coming up on the 23rd of October, and links for you to register, any staff that want to come along. Will be coming out in the next few days, in the next week. So please do look out for that. Really excited for these online sessions, and really looking forward to another conference this year for those specific regions. So enough of me. My first guest I want to invite to have a chat to is Ryan Tan. And the reason, well, Ryan has so much interesting stuff to talk to us about, but one of the main reasons specifically today that I really wanted to invite Ryan on the call is, as you know, as many of you will know, today is World Suicide Day. And it's really important for us, especially at This Can Happen, to reflect on that. And so I really wanted to have a chat with Ryan because he is involved in this space. And hi, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to have you here.
Hello.
And so, Ryan, I just wanted you actually to introduce yourself to the audience and tell us about your employee experience, and what you're doing at Braze.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan, Senior Employer Brand and Employee Experience Specialist at Braze, and I'm based in Singapore. I focus on the strategy, creating engaging events and initiatives that showcases our culture, attract top talent, and support employees across their life cycle within the company. I actually help to drive the workplace culture, employee advocacy, as well as recognition programs to enhance their engagement and to amplify our employer brand within the region. And through it all, I strongly believe in creating positive experiences for our employees across the region and globally, ensuring that our workplace culture fosters these engagements, growth, and well-being. And prior to Braze, and I think this is why I was kind of asked to join this session, is that I used to work for the only suicide prevention agency in Singapore before actually venturing and stepping into the tech space. It was there that I realized that there may be gaps around the workplace mental health or well-being space in the region, and that I was genuinely curious about and seeing how I can potentially contribute to. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you, Ryan. So tell us about suicide prevention in your region. What's the stigma that currently exists around it, and are people accessing help? Is this something that people are speaking about?
I think that's a really fantastic question. As you correctly pointed out, we commemorate World Suicide Prevention Day today, and this topic is ever so important on a day-to-day basis, and I'm very glad to share my views. Suicide prevention is always a particularly sensitive and complex issue, regardless whether we're talking about within the Asia Pacific region or even globally, internationally. Generally speaking, I think misconceptions around suicide or mental health conditions are always present. While many a time we recognize the importance to always talk about suicide prevention and suicide and its prevention, or even talking about mental health in general, you would kind of observe that many still skirt around conversations, avoid saying certain things. But so that kind of amplifies and highlight that there is still significant stigma around this topic. But I mean, since you have asked me, in many countries across this region, I believe that conversations about emotional struggles and suicidal thoughts are still considered very private or even taboo at times. But I believe that there has been progress, although it might be baby steps, ever since I left the mental health space some 4 years ago. This stigma can very much still impact us in several ways. It prevents us from discussing challenges with our peers or with our loved ones, or even at the workplace with our managers. It also prevents, or rather makes seeking help slightly more difficult. And actually using available mental health resources, in some cases and in some countries, access to such resources may be limited geographically or even just by the number of resources being available. So what potentially drives or frames stigma? I would probably say, broadly speaking, societal expectations, your immediate environment, and the fear of judgment, or rather perceived judgment, would contribute to potentially underreporting or having the impression that there are limited access to support, which makes it even more important for us as individuals or for us as organizations to proactively provide these mini pockets of safe, confidential spaces to encourage this help-seeking behavior. And I think intuitively, the word prevention signifies the early stages, like where we reduce risks or protect against harm. But such preventive measures can be complicated on an individual level, as what makes you and me feel safe is really subjective. And with that said, I think regardless whether is it being difficult, how difficult it is, it's definitely worth the effort to make it easier for those around us to open up. Yeah.
I agree with all of that, Ryan. And somebody has written, Dawn from Mars has written, I couldn't agree more. We had a really powerful session on this yesterday in her organisation. We had over 200 people join. So there's definitely appetite to learn more. And this can happen of running a session today. And I think we've got over 400 people joining. So there are people want to understand. And as you said, it's just baby steps. So really just sort of a final point from you. The people in this audience today are, like you in the workplace. What would you recommend if they haven't been looking at this subject before? What can they offer to employees?
Yeah, I think based on my experience, based on what I've observed, one of the most important things that organizations or us as individuals can actually do is to create an environment where mental health conversations or mental health in general are normalized and openly discussed.
Yeah.
So it could look like us being vulnerable or even leaders setting the tone being very crucial. Like when managers or leadership talk openly about mental well-being, it does send a signal to employees that it is safe to be vulnerable and it's safe to receive support. Ultimately, being vulnerable is always not easy, and recognizing that if leaders can be vulnerable in a professional setting can ultimately encourage to break down these walls that we have and the impressions that actually talking about difficulties or what we are facing is something that I should stay away from. And on top of that, I think education and awareness help dismantle some of the myths around suicide and mental health, simple things like training managers, like to recognize signs of distress, providing peer support networks, and sharing stories of recovery can help a huge difference. Um, for example, in Braze, we actually have an employee resource group that's dedicated to mental well-being
Yep.
called, it's termed Healthy Minds at Braze. So one of the programs that they have ran is actually to sponsor individuals across the global offices that we have to undergo mental health first aid training. So this way, whether are you a leader, are you a manager, or you are just an individual contributor, more people within our various offices can act as a point of contact to reassure person who may be experiencing a mental health issue or emotional distress and signpost them to professional support. And with these signposting, it kind of reiterates that this environment is somewhat safe for them to kind of talk to someone, right? But
Absolutely.
underlying these safe spaces is the reassurance that whatever that you are telling us is always confidential and you would have access to support channels. So, for example, you can implement employee assistance program, which may or may not include 24/7 hotlines, or providing local psychotherapy or psychiatric services would be important resources that employees who may require direct support from an external professionals. Ultimately, we're not saying that everyone should be trained professionals at the workplace, but if we are there to kind of help signpost people who may be experiencing emotional distress, it would help them feel at ease that, yeah, there is something that I can reach out to when I really need it. And
Absolutely. Ryan, thank you so much. Do you know what? I think it's just wonderful to know that organizations are really putting things in place and to start these conversations. I really am very grateful for you coming this afternoon for you to talk to us about it in your region specifically. So thank you so much for joining us and
thank you.
hope you'll stay on and listen for the rest of the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zoe.
Um, my next guest, I really want to introduce to you is David Ireland. Now, David is, as many of you will know, we have been very much focused on a huge fertility research project. Currently, it is out in the research project questionnaire is out in Japan, in France, in Poland, lots of different places. And one of the things I think we do tend to focus on slightly more, I think, is the woman's story. And today, David is here. David, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd love to understand from you a little bit more about your experience of infertility and how it's affected your mental well-being.
Hi Zoe, thanks so much for inviting me this morning. Really delighted to be here with you and everybody else listening. It's very interesting you mention it. I mean, infertility generally is quite a big topic now globally. And for people listening today, 1 in 6 couples globally now have an issue trying to conceive naturally, whether you know that or not. And um, what's really interesting, actually, 50% of that is down to the male factor. Not that many of us men like to admit that because we've all got egos, right? So that's the typical taboo, I guess. And thinking about my own or me and my wife's fertility journey, it started quite a few years ago. We were actually living in Australia at the time, Zoe, and like anyone young, and you go out, you party, whatever you do. And then we started trying for a family kind of 2015, and nothing was working. And we didn't know why it wasn't working. We're quite fit, healthy. We had a great lifestyle, great diet. And then I went to a clinic in Sydney, and doctor said, "Oh, you've got a low sperm count." And I was like, "Well, what does that mean?" And he said, "You just imagine your sperm are swimming, but they're kind of a bit drunk in a sense." And it didn't really mean anything to me at all. And it was only kind of looking at that and then thinking about how can I improve my own sperm production. There were so many factors that went into this, Zoe, and it took us years and years and years going through spending thousands of dollars, speaking to so many different consultants who didn't have an answer, and everybody who gave us an answer was a completely different answer to what we was expecting. And thinking about how that relates to our own well-being and mental health is horrific. I remember the first time my wife actually got taken away to go and have her egg collection done, and I was like, oh my God, what's going on? It's something that I think it's something that scarred me for life in that sense. And it's very difficult, I think, particularly for men, because I mentioned, men have egos. We don't like to express ourselves so much at all. If you're in the pub talking to your mates about, you can't have a family, they'll just, you get the impression that they're going to laugh at you.
Yeah.
Whereas for women, it's a lot more easy because they're more open to talking about these things.
Yeah.
Whereas for men, we don't have a group, or there's not a confidence group where we can go to speak to people about it. So
Sorry.
No, please. I was
No,
say
I was just going to say, at this stage,
Mm,
you were an HR professional yourself?
absolutely. So I've been in HR for about 12 years now,
Right.
and working in HR, going through this journey, I found that really, really daunting because I'm
Yeah.
there, I'm having to show up every day, I'm having to sit in board meetings and think about people within the organization and helping them with their issues and their struggles.
Yeah.
And people would usually come to me, confide in me, and which was fantastic. But I was struggling myself.
How did the workplace support you?
They didn't, and that's the thing. I remember being in, and I won't mention the company, but I was in one particular company, and I remember being there. And I know at this time, my wife had to check to see whether we had a positive or a negative from our IVF round, and it came back a negative, and it completely broke me, absolutely broke me. But
Yeah.
I still had to sit there. I still had to continue and do my work for the day and show up and smile and put on that brave face. And it's very hard when you're a client facing in a HR position,
Yeah.
having to go to these meetings and having these conversations. So I don't see it very often that there is a safe space to talk for men in the workplace.
Interesting. Yeah.
Um, there needs to be a lot more done around how do we support men through their own journey. I remember doing a policy for menopause for women, and I knew nothing about menopause at the time. So one
Yeah.
organisation is now speaking about infertility, but from a male point of view, we allow time off in organisations for different things, but no one's really talking about the male side. And it's interesting listening to the other speakers about how suicide impacts men, particularly in their 30s to 40s.
Yeah.
Infertility is equally just as important as it is for any other policy that you have in a workplace. And I think there needs to be a lot more done to actually encourage that support for men and have more talking groups for men to actually be open and share their fears and their struggles and the anxiety that they're currently going through.
So for what you've just said, I'm sure is a very big insight for people here. So you mentioned talking groups, just what do you think? What takeaways could you give to people on this call? What can workplaces be doing more for the wider, as you said, men or the infertility journey, whatever it might be?
I think organizations need to listen more, first of all. I think they need to normalize it because we all have this issue. 1 in 6 have an issue globally. So it's not a new thing that's coming up. I think it's because people don't generally want to talk about this. So I think there'd be more policies in place for this, for male infertility. I think we need to start creating more groups for men to have discussions, whether you'd get somebody to come into an organization and have a one-on-one 15-minute conversation. That's probably more likely to happen from a man point of view because I don't really see a group of guys sitting in a room talking about their infertility. That
Yeah.
I don't see yet. Women may be more open to that, but guys not so. So I think you need to have companies, my point of view, I'd have somebody come in once a month for the full day and having like 15-minute slots with for men who want to go in and just vent. I think that's a great idea that companies need to think about, start doing. You can do surveys as well, which I think would be quite useful, depending on how honest a man would be about his own fertility.
David, oh gosh, the cogs are already turning in my brain. We're very grateful for you for giving us this insight today. Thank you very, very much for joining us, David. Much appreciated, and for your openness and honesty. That is huge. I want you to know you are in a safe space here, and there. I think that's really. We're really grateful to you. And somebody has just put in the chat box, and maybe you might want to follow up with this, David, if you know about. Oh, I've sort of just lost it actually. About policies and if you know of any policies and whether people publicise their policies or would be willing to share. So maybe that's something you could look up. Can continue on the chat box, David, if you're able.
Yeah, sure.
Wonderful.
Absolutely happy to help and happy to answer any questions. I know sometimes, I don't know if there's any men on this call, but sometimes people don't know who to go to or who to have a conversation. So if anybody wants to reach out to me, feel free to share my details and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, David. Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Really, thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated today.
Thanks,
Really.
Zoe.
Okay, so our final guest today is a follow-up from our conference, our June conference, where we did a really interesting and thought-provoking session on trauma. So we just wanted to finish the day Coffee and Insights off by inviting Ravi Gill to have a very brief conversation with me. She comes from a clinical perspective, has a great job both in the police, I believe, and is going to talk to us about trauma today. So Ravi, hi and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for you.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Great. So just tell us, I mentioned about the police, and just tell us exactly sort of your role and, what can I say trends that you're seeing at the moment from a clinical perspective? I don't think that's probably the right way of asking, but what are you seeing?
Yeah, so my role actually falls under the occupational health domain, and it's contracted to the Metropolitan Police Services. So I'm one of the lead psychologists there. In terms of trends, I'm a bit funny with that word as well, myself, because I think it's hard to put into words. I think it's very much from my clinical perspective over the years that I've been sort of working there. There's been a lot of misrepresentation, I would say, of hidden trauma. I think it's very much been translating through as an anxiety presentation because we haven't had the language or haven't felt comfortable navigating the language, especially within a culture such as the Met, to be able to put our hands up and say, actually, I think this is trauma. And it's really easy to say, well, not easy, but people perhaps are a little bit more comfortable because of the rise of anxiety related language to say, I think I'm a little bit nervous about going to this particular scene, or I don't quite feel ready for that. But actually, perhaps not understanding that there could be an underlying presentation of trauma actually quite deeply rooted within their presentation.
Well, yes. Okay. So obviously you said you're assigned whatever to the Metropolitan Police. I don't believe we have anyone from the Metropolitan Police on this call today. Obviously a lot of other workplaces. So what would you I don't know what recommendations, even again, is that the word? I'm struggling with the words, in terms of what workplaces can do and to help individuals, or maybe what learnings can they take from what the Met Police do well?
Yes. So I think very much when we first came in, it was very much that culture change. When you go into any kind of organization, whether it's the Met or any kind of other space, it's about making the language a lot more common, a lot more basic, a lot more accessible for people to be able to recognize and say, actually, what does it look like? So, within the Met, we've actually not used clinical terms as such. It's a case of, what does a bad day look like for you? Recognizing there are multiple things going on inside of work, outside of work. What does a bad day look like? And changing the narrative and how we approach those really important questions. What's changed within the last 6 months? Have you noticed any particular changes? And rather than focusing on what we would call the clinical symptoms and the presentation, let's start looking around. What's your sleep been like? Have the shifts been really quite disruptive if there's been shift changes? If you've been posted out on aid, as I'm sure everyone is aware, there are lots of different things going out in the world. So shifts are being changed suddenly, you're being posted out to protests and things like that. How does that impact you? How does it impact family life? How do you manage that? How do you find, how quickly are you able to sort of get back into a routine? Do you struggle with it? Where's the adjustment part of it? And asking questions kind of around the issue helps us to kind of explore and dig a little bit deeper about what actually could be coming up.
And actually, from a line manager, HR professional point of view, there's an ability to be able to have those conversations because it's not clinical. They can use their, as you said, the normal everyday conversations.
Right. Yes.
But just give us an insight, finally, just from a clinical point of view, if a symptom did present as anxiety and somebody on this call, either through they'd been to their EAP or something, knew about a member of staff that they'd had a clinical assessment, for example, and it had been presented as anxiety, but when in fact it's masked as trauma, what are the implications for the workplace, and how can that spiral? How does it go, like, from that anxiety assessment to actually being trauma?
Yeah, I think one of the most common sort of misrepresentations of the blurring of the few would actually be something like disassociation, how we're very much present here, but we're actually not. We're actually quite far detached and emotionally not connected. So if we think about some of the nature of the cases that people have to deal with, that they're not able to kind of be their full selves and not arrive with their full selves at work. So yes, they are functioning, but to what extent are they actually present within that space? So recognizing that as you seem a bit distracted, what's going on? And within, like I said, the clinical assessment, the clinician, whoever that is, will be able to kind of unpick and explore what actually is the underlying kind of root cause here of that anxiety sort of playing up. How did it first start? When did you first start to behave this way? What are the others, what we call safety behaviors that an individual has put in place to help mask some of what else may be coming up?
So I think something for sure that I have learned is this masking of trauma, and that we mustn't necessarily assume that it's anxiety, that it could be something deeper. Again, people on this call aren't expected to be experts. That's why we have you. But I think just this underlying understanding of what could be happening in their workplace, I think, is really vital. So just sort of really as a final soundbite from you, what would you say to all the people listening on the call today from your perspective and how they're looking after their staff?
It's a question of, if you were having a particularly bad day, what is it that you would need from the workplace around you? If we start to think about actually how much time we spend within a workplace, how much time we spend with the colleagues around us. If you had to notice a bad day within someone, how would you recognize that? How would you recognize it for yourself? For some people, they're able to kind of take themselves off, go for a walk, and kind of then come back into the space. For other people, it's not so easy. People might need that nudge. So if you're the person that's able to nudge them to say, do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to go for a chat? The impact that has can be huge. And it's just the start of bigger conversations being had. But that safe space being created within a workplace, I think, is becoming more and more important.
Yeah. Ravi, thank you so much. I know we've been trying to get you on a Coffee and Insights for, I think, the whole year. So we're very happy to have had you today. Really great perspective from you. Thank you. Thank you ever so much. Really, really do appreciate it. So yet again, Coffee and Insights have come to an end. Really do very grateful for you all. Hope you have had a great coffee. Hope you've had a few insights, and enjoy the rest of your day. Look forward to seeing everybody very soon, whether it's at conferences, webinars, whatever it might be. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and have a good rest of your day, everyone. See you.